Hello everyone, and welcome to this AAAS Member Central and Science Careers live audio webinar. My name is Sean Sanders, and I am Editor for Custom Publishing and Program Director for Outreach at Science. Jobs for scientists outside of academic and industry research have often been called alternative careers. However, statistics that have become available over the last few years seem to indicate that the majority of Ph.D. graduates do not and will not in the future obtain bench research positions in academia or industry. So these non-research positions are now apparently the norm rather than the alternative. In today's panel discussion, we'll be talking with three scientists who have taken a non-research career path. They have all found great success and career satisfaction, and will share their thoughts on how best to approach the pursuit of a non-bench career, as well as answer questions from our live online audience. It gives me great pleasure to introduce that panel to you now. Firstly, from the journal Science here in Washington, D.C., we have our esteemed Editor-in-Chief, Dr. Marcia McNutt. Then on the line from the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, is Dr. Laurie Conlon, who is Director of the Office of Postdoctoral Services. And finally, from Seattle on the West Coast, we have Dr. Anish Goel, who is Director of Geopolitical Affairs at the Boeing Company. Thank you all so much for being with me today. Just a few quick notes to our viewing audience. Note that you can resize or hide any of the windows in your viewing console. The widgets at the bottom of the console control what you see. Click on these to see the speaker bios or additional links related to today's discussion. If you're joining us live, you can submit a question to the panel at any time by typing it into the box on the bottom left of your viewing console and clicking the Submit button. If you can't see this box, click the red Q&A widget at the bottom of the screen. We'll do our best to get to as many of the questions as possible. Your question has the best chance of being put to our panel if you do keep it short and to the point. Instead of me introducing each of the panelists today, I'm going to give them each a few minutes to tell you about themselves, as well as highlight some of the critical points in their lives that led them to the career path that they're on. For official bios of the speakers, just click the blue speaker bio icon at the bottom of the console. So Marcia, can we possibly start with you?
Yes, thank you very much, Sean, and it's a pleasure to be here today, especially with this large audience online. My career path began as a very traditional academic career path, in fact one that by many measures was a very successful one, in that in less than 10 years of joining an academic research university, I was a tenured full professor with an endowed chair. But rather than remaining in academia, I left MIT and went to work for a very small, unknown research oceanographic lab as its director. And so many people asked, why would I make this change? And that was sort of what took me on my path to a non-traditional career. And I think there were many reasons why I took this change. First of all, one was that I sort of knew myself and what was going to make me happy. Secondly, I was following my passion in doing this. And secondly, I was considering the broader picture of both family and career. So let me expound upon those three factors. First of all, in knowing myself, when I was a young assistant professor, I had taken a personality test as part of a research project by a professor at UCLA who wanted to study the personalities of women in science. And this personality test would characterize people as falling within a triangle, and the vertices of the triangle would be the leader, the loner, and the follower. And the perfectly balanced person would fit in the middle of the triangle. And this professor called me breathlessly to tell me that I was her Joan of Arc, because I had fallen on the midway point between the leader and the loner. basically she said I was the person who would lead the troops into battle, but if they wouldn't follow me, I would just do it myself. And so, knowing that about myself, when I was offered the opportunity to leave MIT and go to this small oceanographic research lab that had been founded by David Packard to be a NASA for the oceans, a place called the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, to do things in a new and different way, I realized that this was exactly the kind of place that I belonged, a place where I could do things differently, to be a leader, and if others didn't follow, it didn't matter because I'd just do it myself. The second thing that led me to take this new opportunity was that my children were just entering junior high school and high school, and they really needed me more at that point in time because they were beginning to do sports after school. They were no longer little children anymore. And as a scientist, I was an oceanographer, and I'd been spending a lot of time at sea as a scientist, and I really needed a job where I was spending more time at home. And being a director of an institution, I would be traveling a lot less. So it really was attractive to me to take a job where I could spend more time at home. And finally, I was very passionate about this opportunity to build a new institution and make it successful. So this started me on a path then after being 12 years at this research institution to eventually then going to Washington, D.C. to lead the U.S. Geological Survey under the Obama administration, and then finally here to Science Magazine. And the only other thing I'd say was something I learned along the way was to always build bridges along the way, never burn them. And that was because you never know that someone you meet along the way who may be a postdoc today, may be an important staffer for a congressman tomorrow who's going to open a door for you, or may become a very important leader of an initiative at the National Science Foundation tomorrow. So I made sure that everyone I met I dealt with respect and with the kind of courtesy that I would want to be treated with. So that's it for me, Sean.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Marcia. Some really great points there that we'll definitely be coming back to later. So, Lori, how about we have you go next?
Fantastic. Sean, thanks for having me today. I'm really thrilled to be part of the AAAS team, so to speak, today. I know when I was a graduate student back in the 90s, AAAS and Next Wave, what it was called at the time, was crucial to me finding the types of career paths that I finally went down. So my career actually came about in what I like to call planned happenstance. So looking back on it, it looks very planned, but at the time it seemed like a random walk. So I started out as a graduate student at Texas A&M in biochemistry and biophysics, knowing that I was never going to go and be a tenure-track faculty member. It had no love for me whatsoever. But I knew for the things that I did want to do, I wanted to, at that time in my career, to go teach at a small university without a research component, that the Ph.D. was necessary. And so I went off to do my Ph.D. Because that was going to open doors for me. And so as I was a Ph.D. student, I got very involved with the Biochemistry Graduate Association that was at the university I was at, and I brought in speakers to come and talk about their career paths. So I networked around and found someone to come talk about policy or come talk about industry or writing, all along trying to think about what I would want to do as well as options for my peers as well. I decided to do a postdoc for a lot of reasons. I needed to see a different side of science, and I wanted to see if a bigger lab would increase my love for bench science or if it was really that wasn't my passion. So I chose to do a postdoc, and I had a lot of reasons, and I was very strategic about the postdoc that I went to go get. And I loved my postdoc time. It was a fantastic opportunity. But again, I knew that I was never going to be a PI. In fact, my postdoc advisor tried to convince me to be a PI, and I laughed at her and said, "You're not going to do it." But one day, I started a postdoc organization when I was there, postdoc association, and did a lot of opportunities with working with fellows, again, creating seminars about career paths. And there was a job offer one day. I got a job offer from, in fact, Science to run Next Wave. At the same day, I got my grant scores for my NRSA. And I opted to choose the NRSA because my husband had just started his postdoc, and he was not ready to move to D.C. So we stayed for another 3 years. I gained more experience, but I knew at that point that it was really important that I go on a career path that would really focus on career options for the next generation of scientists. And I made the career move about 8 years ago now. I started at the New York Academy of Sciences, and I was there for 2 years running an international career program called Science Alliance. And then I was recruited to the NIH about 6 years ago to open their postdoc office, and subsequently I've been asked to run the Career Services Center here at the NIH as well. Looking back, it looks very planned. Did seminars, got networking experience, joined national organizations, but at the time it seemed a random walk because I had no idea I would ever end up running a postdoc office because that didn't exist when I started my career. So I'd be happy to take more questions. I'm thrilled to be here, and Sean, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Lori. And finally, we're going to have Anish.
Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for inviting me to share a panel with such esteemed colleagues. And thank you to all the participants for dialing in. I've heard there's up to a couple of thousand participants on the phone, so I'm very happy to be talking to all of you. As Sean mentioned, I work now for the Boeing company, but I like to tell people that I'm actually on my third career now. I started out in academia as a grad student doing a Ph.D. And when I finished my Ph.D., I decided, I don't really want to do research anymore, and I was really into international foreign policy. So through AAAS, actually, I was fortunate enough to get a policy fellowship, and I ended up in the government for about 10 years working on different foreign policy issues related to South Asia. And after almost 10 years in the government, I decided, I've kind of done what I've set out to do, and maybe it's time to see what the private sector is all about. So I switched over to working for Boeing. Each career has been fantastic, and I've enjoyed them all. And in terms of what made me decide to pursue a non-research career, I can remember it was in my last year of graduate school. I was a graduate student at MIT, and when I started graduate school, I didn't really have any preset notions about what I wanted to do afterwards. Mostly I was just avoiding the real world for as long as I could. And when I got to my last year, a few things started entering into my mind. One was that I was always very interested in foreign policy and international affairs and what was going on. And I did actually an internship in the federal government. I took a summer away from my doctoral studies and did an internship to see what it was like. And I found that I really enjoyed it. And so I was thinking, I really do like working on policy. So maybe I should think about that a little bit more. And then I think the decision for me was cemented when I was getting close to graduation and I started interviewing. And I did interview for traditional research jobs, both in academia and in industry. And I remember at one interview, I won't name the company in case there's some folks from that company on the line today, but in one interview, the recruiter was telling me, we have a lot of really interesting projects going on for PhD chemical engineers. You'd be really, it'd be a really great career move for you. And I said, well, so what are some of these interesting projects? And he said, well, we're working a lot on making cough syrup more blue or shampoo more frothy. And I thought to myself, that just it doesn't interest me. And so that's when I decided that, if I'm really interested in policy, I should pursue that. And then for the rest of my career, to steal Lori's phrase, it was kind of planned happenstance in that I, always kept my eye out for opportunities and was willing to take the opportunities as they came along, even if they were outside my comfort zone. When I started in the government, I had no policy experience, no background in foreign policy. But it was because of the PhD that I was hired. Because the PhD, I've learned more than teaching you about a specific scientific method or a specific area really teaches you how to think and analyze critically. And that's a skill that I found is highly sought after in many different places. And so with that, I'll stop there and ask Sean to open up for questions. Happy to answer anything that anyone may have.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Anish. So some people are having a little trouble hearing you, so I'm just going to ask you to speak up a little bit if you can. Thanks very much, Marsha and Laurie, as well. And I think we've got a lot of points for discussion here. We've got a lot of questions that have come in. Anish led perfectly into the first discussion that I'd like to have, which is that decision point of whether or not to do a Ph.D. And I'm sure a lot of people on the line already have Ph.D.s, but there's probably a good number who are trying to make that decision. So, Laurie, I think maybe I'll come to you first. And if you could talk to some of the things that these folks should be thinking about when they come into that decision point of whether they should commit to a Ph.D. or not.
Whether they should commit to a Ph.D. That's a really personal question. And I think one of the greatest things is that you are coming to a workshop like this today in order to come in with your eyes wide open so you understand what the career options are and how you're going to get there. Because not always will you need a Ph.D. You perhaps may need to look at some of the professional science master's programs, or perhaps a master's program in public health or something else, public policy. But getting the Ph.D. does give you some very critical skills. The things that it gave me was, I like to call it gave me a backbone. It gave me the ability to stand up for myself and stand up for my ideas. And I can 100% say that I would not be the person I am without the Ph.D. experience. But if you do opt to go to a Ph.D. program in any science field, know what your options are when you get out before you get started, and make sure that you're gaining those critical skill sets, the communication skills, the leadership skills, the teaching and mentoring skills, and the research skills, so that when you finish, you can have the career of your choice, not the career you think somebody's forcing you into.
Great, thanks, Laurie. So I'm going to put up a slide just as a talking point for us, for our audience to see. It says a non-research career need not be a second choice. So this is the next point I'd like to talk to, and I'm going to come to Marsha for this one. And this is just the idea that the statistics are showing these days that, in fact, most Ph.D. graduates are not going to end up in a research position. They might end up in a science position, but it's not necessarily going to be research. So what I guess I'd like to ask Marsha is in your career, you started off as very much in research. Did you ever have a suspicion that you would not end up there, and did you plan for that?
Actually, no. What was interesting was every job I had, I was sure it would be my job for the rest of my life. So I never took a job without the commitment that I would be doing it forever. And in fact, I think that had I not had that attitude, I would not have been able to do each job to the best of my ability, and that's probably what got me my next job. So that, I think that sometimes people who always have their eye on some job in the far future are maybe neglecting the job they have now, and for that reason may never get that dream job in the far future because they aren't paying attention to the job they should be doing now. So, I think it's important to always do the job you have now to the best of your ability, and then maybe some other job will happen for you. But I never really imagined that I would be sitting here as editor-in-chief of Science when I began my career. I'm very pleased that I have this job, but it was never in my vision.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, Anish, let me come to you. We did receive a question about your transition from an S&T policy fellow into the job market. So perhaps you could speak to what your thoughts were when you got your Ph.D., what your intentions were, and how that impacted where you ended up.
Sure. Thank you for the question. When I finished my Ph.D. and had made the decision that I didn't want to do research for my career and that I wanted to see what policy was like, I did my homework in terms of looking at the different options out there because I didn't want to just sort of jump in blind. And the Science and Technology Policy Fellows Program through AAAS was seemed to me, the best sort of transition that I could make from going from academia into a policy job. Now, the fellowship was a 2-year program, and they placed me in the State Department through the fellowship. And when my fellowship was running out, I was again going through this process of, well, what do I do now? Do I go back into academia? Do I, stay on here in the State Department, or, do I go do something completely different? And what it came down to for me was that I just really enjoyed what I was doing, and this gets back to what Marcia was talking about a minute ago. I really liked working in the State Department. I liked thinking about international policy issues. I liked applying the skills that I had learned in my PhD program to international affairs. And fortunately, the State Department was willing to hire me on as a full-time sort of real employee, not as a fellow. And so the transition from S&T policy fellow to sort of regular career position actually was quite smooth for me, and it all seemed very natural to me because it was what I wanted to do. The transition from the government to the private sector was a little bit rougher, to be honest, because it did involve a switch in thinking, and it did involve sort of having a different set of priorities and a different perspective on things. But I knew that my government career, for the time being, had run its course, and that it was time to try something else. And so I wasn't afraid to step out of my comfort zone and just start looking to see what was out there. It wasn't an immediate transition. It took me about 9 or 10 months to survey the landscape and find a position that was something that I really wanted to do. And I drew a lot on my network with all the people that I've met and that I had met and kept in touch with. And so for me, the transitions were all based on, sort of what I wanted to do at that time and where I felt myself going. I, at the same time, always, really enjoying what I was doing at that moment.
Excellent. So I think all three of you have mentioned in a different form this idea that is now up in your slide view, the forge your own path. Under that topic, Laurie, I've got a question that came in for you, and that's that there seems to be a disconnect between academia and educating students on their range of career options. How can students educate themselves about options early in their career? So I guess we're thinking post-PhD or during their PhD to prepare themselves for a future that interests them.
That's a great question, and it is something that over the years we have struggled with in the sciences. But I know the NIH is really committed to helping students think about biomedical workforce, and I'm sure this is happening if you are a forestry major or if you are a chemistry major. There's more talk about career choices and forging ahead now. So I'm hoping that the many graduate programs are starting to talk about career choices. The NIH has invested some money, for example, in this, and you can look for institutions that have won BEST awards, and they definitely will be talking about career options. But if you are an individual student and you're looking for options, I would really recommend the MyIDP that actually is run by Science Careers, and I'm not paid to tell you that. It's a fantastic resource that really goes through helping you to understand what your your skills, your values, and your interests are, and how those match up to various career paths. There's also some great books out there, and I'm sure there's a list of these books. I know they have them on our website, and I'm sure Science Careers has them as well. But you should spend a lot of time doing some exploratory research and doing some primary literature, so to speak, research, and then using networking and informational interviewing to really gain those options so that you can figure out what's out there. You may also have access to a career center on your campuses, and each career center has their own strengths and weaknesses, but it could be another possible avenue for you to understand the different options out there for folks in the sciences as they forge their own careers forward.
Sean, this is
Yes.
Marcia. If I can jump in here, another thing is that I know many universities have students in charge of their colloquium programs, and students should be pushing to have colloquium visitors who are doing non-traditional academic career paths.
Fantastic. Good.
Yeah,
good point.
there's actually a lot of these different types of career symposiums that happen around the country. And you should look to see if there is one hosted by an institution that's close to you. For example, the New York City group has every other year a session called What You Can Be with a Ph.D. We have one on May 16th here in Bethesda. Everyone's welcome, called the NIH Career Symposium. I know out at UCSF they have one. In San Diego they have one. I was just at one in Houston. So you should look around the country to see what kinds of career symposiums are available to you, and see if you can, even as a non-resident, so to speak, of that university, attend.
Right, Gloria, I'm going to stay with you for a question about doing a postdoc. Now, you mentioned that you did a postdoc and you were very matter-of-fact about that. You did it for specific reasons. Can you talk a little bit more broadly about the decision points, whether one should do a postdoc if there is an intention to not stay in research?
Right. That's a good question. I've had some very successful graduate students who have come through our program who have competed for jobs right out of their graduate program. But those people who have competed for jobs in communications and science policy, directly to industry, et cetera, have worked very hard as a graduate student to build additional skill sets and transferable skills, as well as a large network, so that when it came time to go, people knew who they were. Some of us didn't spend our time doing that necessarily as a graduate student, or they just wanted a little bit more research experience and independence experience. And so for some of us, going to a postdoc is a necessary career step. And it's not a holding pattern, but it's a way for you to go and gain additional skills, whether that's inside the lab or outside the lab, in order to make yourself a more attractive candidate to whatever career path you eventually go towards.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect. Marcia, we had a question related to that about if someone wanting to get into writing and editing, and they're wondering whether postdoctoral work is an advantage or not.
Yes, I really think it is, especially if you're talking about scientific writing and editing. I think that the thing about scientific writing and editing is that the candidate needs the broadest possible view of the sciences. And so the more that the scientist can demonstrate that they've stepped beyond their Ph.D. and been exposed to more facets of science by, say, taking a postdoc in a field that is a step removed from what they did their graduate work in, I think it's a huge advantage. Scientific writing and editing is really something that involves being able to synthesize many different disciplines, and so the broader the person is exposed, the better.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So, Anish, I'm going to come to you now with a question on public policy. This viewer was asking what experience they should try gather if they're interested in going into public policy.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question, and I understand some people are having trouble hearing me, so I'll try and speak up. In terms of what experiences people should gather if they're interested in public policy, if they're a graduate student, should be lots of resources available to them through their departments of public policy in their universities. There's always policy discussions happening on. So I think those are the types of experiences that you want to be involved in. Take a class in public policy, see if it's really for you. For people that are sort of more advanced in their careers, I think the experiences that are quite valuable is just to start thinking about public policy and how it relates to your work or how it relates to issues that you're interested in. and just start, engaging with your representatives. Maybe volunteer at, the city council, or start going to city council meetings, depending on what level of policy you want to be involved in, and start looking for opportunities where you can be involved in policy issues. I think what a lot of people may not realize is that, especially at the state and local level, the policy issues are open to the public for comment and for input. And once you start engaging, you'll start to learn a lot more about these, and you'll start to develop the connections and the experiences that will help you decide if that's something you really want to go into.
So the next slide I'm going to put up here is something that Marsha actually said, which is build, don't burn bridges. And I'd like to take a slight tangent to this, which is to talk a little bit about networking. So Marsha, since this was your phrase, perhaps you could talk about how you networked through your career in order to get to the place you are now.
Oh, absolutely. Networking, I think, is one of the most underrated and valuable aspects of any attempt to get jobs, climb the career ladder that anyone can do. And networking is done, it's really primarily done the old-fashioned way, at meetings, through small conferences. It's done by personally visiting institutions. It's done by sending letters, by sending emails. But networking is the foundation for making the right connections, building personal relationships with people, getting your name and your work out there. As the scientific community has grown larger and more international, it has become even more important because your work cannot. It's become more important for people to be able to connect you personally with your work because of your reputation. And by people being able to connect personally with you and discuss with you your work and your personal ethics and the degree to which the care that you put into your work with the papers you publish, which sometimes doesn't come through just in the publications, I think that you can advance your career very much more rapidly. So networking is very, very important.
Great. Laurie, I'm going to come to you with a follow-up on this. And this viewer asks, they say they don't have a very big social network, so they don't really know where to start. So could you, besides what some of the tips that Marsha has given, do you have any other advice that you could recommend from your perspective?
Definitely. Networking, actually, that's one of my most favorite things is when people say, but I don't know anyone. You know much more people than you think you know. And in fact, one of the biggest parts of networking is learning how to ask for what you need. So if you just go and say, hey, I need a job, everyone's going to go, that's nice, me too. Instead, it's like, I'm looking for a job that uses my skill sets about organizing seminars, and I'm looking for a job that thinks about career paths. What kind of jobs look like that? And then you can ask more specific information to do some informational interviewing. So many of you may have actually heard about informational interviewing. This is where you find someone who perhaps have a job. Maybe you go to the tech transfer office that's in your own university to go talk about career options and technology transfer. So what kind of questions should you ask them? You should be looking for 4 different items. It's like a little protocol here. The first is the present. Tell me about your current job. Do you like it? Do you hate it? What's the best part? Tell me about how many meetings you go to. Are you sitting at a computer alone all day, or do you spend all day in meetings? And in fact, if you go through some of the information on skills, values, and interests, you can actually ask questions in this present to make sure that this job fits your needs. The next part of informational interviewing, which is a critical component of networking, is asking about the past. Ask them how they got there. Who did they network with? This helps you to grow your own network. It's kind of like a seed crystal. You just need a little bit to get going, and then it grows from there. The third component is the future. You should ask the person where do they think they're going, and where do they think the field is going, the competition going, etc. And the fourth question and final question that you should always ask in informational interviewing as part of networking is for advice. Who else should you talk to? Do they know of any career opportunities that are coming up? And also the last one would be, would they look at your resume? By doing these kinds of things, it gives you a little bit of a protocol on networking so it doesn't seem so scary. Another really good reference out there about networking, there's a couple of them that I often recommend. The first one is by Devorah Zach. It's called Networking for People Who Hate Networking, a field guide for the introverted. It's fantastic. Another one is Make Your Contacts Count. I can't remember the author of that one. And another final one is called Power Networking. Each one of these three books offers some really good protocols on how to keep up your networks, how to network using social media, and personal networking as well. So I highly recommend those three references.
Great. Fantastic advice. And I know myself, coming from the sciences, I hated networking as well. But it does get easier once you start doing it.
And you actually do it all the time. It's just you think about it much differently when you're thinking about it as a job. It seems like, oh, got to go network, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of it, you network all the time about protocols, about reagents, about scientific ideas, etc. So just think about it as data gathering for a scientific experiment, and it starts to get a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Anish?
Sure.
I just wanted to add one thing to the networking discussion, and that was that networking doesn't have to be only about you going to others for information. It could also be you helping others out. And that's one way that I've sort of built my network is, if others are coming to me and asking for my assistance or asking for my advice, that's also networking. And it gets back to, what Marcia said at the top is that, you want to keep all these people in your network because you never know when one of them might be helpful.
Right, great point. Let me stay with you actually with a question from a viewer that feels that they're kind of caught in this loop where they want to get into a non-research career, but it requires experience and there's no jobs where they can get experience. So I know that you mentioned that when you moved to government, you were amazed at how many Ph.D. Holders there were in government. So perhaps you could talk to that idea of maybe even how to sell yourself in an interview and talk about how your Ph.D. experience relates to the job that you'll be doing.
Sure. Yeah, happy to talk to that. I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles to switching from a research career to government in any case is people think that, well, I have no experience in government. How can I do it? And I think there's two answers. One is that you actually have more experience than you think you have. Because as I mentioned before, it's about the skills that you've learned, not necessarily whether you know the political background, between India and Pakistan or something like that. But it's about, are you able to think about these issues critically? And when you're, networking or interviewing for these types of positions that are in policy fields, that's what you really want to emphasize, is that you have the skills of what it takes to be successful in those jobs. And the second point is that, as you mentioned, Sean, that a lot of people have made this transition before and gone from science research careers to policy careers without a lot of experience in policy. And if you seek those people out and just talk to them about how they got there, what they did, how did they make the transition, you'll start to realize that it's not as difficult as it seems, and it's not as scary as it seems in the beginning. And so, more than just sort of actual experience, it's about the skills. And the more you can emphasize your skills, I think the easier you'll find it.
Excellent. So for those who might have missed the titles that Laurie mentioned, I know I have two of them here, Make Your Contacts Count by Baber and Waymond, and Power Networking by Fisher and Willis. And Laurie, I can't remember the third one, I'm afraid.
That was Networking for People Who Hate Networking by Devorah Zach.
How could I forget that one?
I know, right? It's a great name.
Great. Let me just grab the next question here. Marsha, I think I'm gonna put this one to you. This is somebody who says they're a little worried about venturing outside of research for fear that they might not be able to return. So what are the possibilities of going back to the lab if they find their non-research career isn't really what they expected?
I won't say that's not a valid concern, because I do think that if you are outside the lab for long periods of time, let's say years and years, I think it's difficult to go back. But there are many examples of people who do routinely go venture outside the lab, for example, to do rotatorships at the National Science Foundation, and then return to their lab after they've done this non-research experience. And they have been, first of all, enriched by that experience, and they return to their labs without missing a beat. And those rotatorships are generally short period stints, only a year or two. So there's certainly ample evidence of people who leave the lab for short periods of time, experience something else that enriches their return to the lab. So I would say if people are interested in experiencing something outside the lab and they find it's not for them, as long as they make that decision on a fairly timely basis, it's not a one-way street, that they can return to the lab, and there's ample evidence to show that that's possible. But it's usually a good idea to pick an experience that will enrich your return to the lab because of the experiences you've had, such as congressional fellowships, tours at a funding agency, things like that, because you come back to your research experience with new knowledge that makes you better at what you were doing in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other comments from our other panelists?
Yeah, this is Lori. I've never regretted my decision once. And I think that's a lot, is the fear that I'm going to regret my decision. And in all honesty, it doesn't matter what you do next, whether you're going to become an academic PI, you're going to go into administration, you're going to go to science editing, you're going to go to science policy. It doesn't matter what it is next. It's jumping off a cliff. You've never done this job before. You went from undergrad, you knew what graduate student school was going to look like. You went from graduate school, you kind of knew what postdoc was going to look like. This next step, it doesn't matter what, you don't know what it looks like. So keep all your options open. Keep your networks up, and then if you do feel you need to transition back and forth from the bench to the non-research-based careers, it's not that bad to do if you do it early. But I can't even imagine going back.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no, I feel the same way.
And there's no way.
I'm going to put this under the Know Thyself heading, and I also wanted to point people once again to the My IDP site that Lori mentioned. There's a link in the resources list tab. That's the green tab with a white folder, and you can get access to the My IDP website, and it's a really great process to go through that will really, I think, help you make decisions like this. And related to this, I thought this was kind of an interesting question because it's something that I've thought about quite a lot having left the lab, and that is, do you miss the prestige of being a scientist or professor? And I guess that's making the assumption that there is some prestige in being a scientist or professor. But Anish, maybe we'll start with you. And do you have just some quick thoughts on that?
Sure, yeah. Well, when I was in academia, I was a grad student, so there really was no prestige involved with that. But I'll be honest, at times I do think that, there might have been some prestige if I'd gone the professor route. But for me, it's always balanced with, there's a lot of prestige also in what I'm doing now. And what the work I did in the government was also very prestigious. So, prestige comes in many forms, not just in academia.
Mm-hmm. Great. Marsha, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. Let me give you a good example. When I was at the U.S. Geological Survey, and the USGS's mission is quite different from that of academia because it takes scientific knowledge, some of it which comes from academia, and it applies it to problems that society has, like having enough water, sufficient energy, raw materials, addressing climate change adaptation, and addressing natural hazards like earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and things like that. And it produces very practical products for helping society deal with it. And I thought, yes, there are people in academia that are doing research that results in publications, but at the USGS, the scientists there are taking that research and they're actually helping people with real ways to confront real challenges to society. And so although the career I was doing at the USGS might not be the academic career I would have had at MIT, I was so much more satisfied by, losing my voice, by the contributions that I was making at the USGS than just by putting more publications on my resume, that there was really no comparison.
Great. Lori, some comments from you?
The only thing I would say to add on to those great comments that both of my fellow panelists have said is that prestige is what you make of it, not what somebody else makes of it. So it's your career. It's your choice. And so as long as I'm doing a good job, I'm going to have prestige in the field that I've chosen. So just because I don't have prestige necessarily as a biochemist anymore, I have prestige as someone who understands career development for young scientists. And to me, that's what I value. So find what you value, not what somebody else tells you should value.
Excellent point. Anisha, any quick comment from you?
No, to follow on what I said, I agree wholeheartedly with what Lori and Marcia said. Prestige is something that comes from within, and you can find anywhere as long as you enjoy what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we had a question asking for the link to my IDP. If you can't find it, I can tell you it right now. It's my IDP, so that's myidp.sciencecareers.org. And I do encourage everybody to take a look at that. Anisha, I'm going to come to you now with the question. So looking back at your career path, what skills do you think you would have tried to gain before starting on a non-research career path? In other words, what additional skills do you think are needed for a non-research job?
Is that skills in addition to what I learned in the Ph.D. that I already had?
Yeah, I think this is thinking more of soft skills.
Right. I think what I would have spent more time developing before I went to a non-research career would be my communication skills. Because in the career path that I've chosen, being able to write well, being able to present well in a non-academic fashion has been very important, and that was something I picked up on the job. And being able to speak, in a group setting, or even, give a speech, or depending on the circumstances, to me, communication skills are something that I would have spent more time developing. I also would have spent more time developing my networking skills, like we've already talked about. I think in engineering PhD programs, there's not a lot of emphasis on networking, and so when I first got out there, outside of academia, I didn't really understand what I was supposed to do or how I was supposed to do it. So that's something that I would have developed more, and I think probably helped me quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Great. Lori, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, if I could do it all over again, I would volunteer in an office or make sure that I'm doing the committee work that really fits. I did a lot of committee work as a graduate student and a postdoc, and that really helped. That helped with the networking. I did some things outside of the lab. I worked for Weight Watchers for years, which really helped me to gain some public speaking skills. But what really surprised me when I first went to my first non-bench job was office skills, and how being in a seat all day was much more difficult than I thought it was going to be. And some of the office-based, like using Excel is totally different in what I do now versus what I would have done in the lab. I can map anything on Kaleidograph, but I had a hard time with Excel. So gaining some more experience with some of the office-based things. And so a lot of you could go and perhaps volunteer in the technology transfer office, the postdoc office, the grad office, by asking them if they have any, do they need help analyzing any data or writing reports or things like that. You can get experience writing, written communication skills. I hated to write in the lab, but what I learned afterwards is I didn't like technical writing. I really love non-technical writing. So I wish I would have gotten a lot more experience doing non-technical writing as a postdoc or graduate student, writing for the newsletters or things like that, because I think it would have fostered my love for writing that I have now that I didn't have when I was in the lab. So see if you can get some non-research group experiences at your home institution or through various committees to make sure that you're ready to go for the next step.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Marsha, perhaps I could ask you the same question about skills, but maybe with a bit of a focus on the publishing side of things, both editing and writing.
Well, I think this is true for publishing, but I think it's true broader too. I'd say it's all about the people, no matter what job you have. And I think in general, a lot of people go into science because they basically like working with facts and figures and test tubes and computers. And many of them just basically are not very social animals to begin with. And one of the bigger challenges is therefore picking up the people skills that are required in many non-research careers. And by that I mean, how do you get the most out of the people that you're working with? How do you read people? How do you figure out what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are so that you can put everyone in just the right place in the team? And how do you assign them the right tasks such that they're all in their comfort zones? And I know that one thing that really influenced me early on when I was director at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute was we took an institute-wide test that characterized everyone as one of four colors. They were either a blue, a green, an orange, or a gold, based on how they answered these innocuous questions. And when the results came back, we found that all of the engineers in the institution were gold, all of the scientists were green, all of the marine operations people were orange, and all of the people in education and outreach were blue. And so the institution had self-sorted the divisions according to these colors, and it all depended on what people valued. The scientists, who were the greens, valued getting the answer right. The golds, who were the engineers, valued process like did you do your design reviews? Did you optimize schedule? Did you optimize safety? The oranges, who were the marine operations people, just wanted to get the job done. Did you bump the dock on time, and did you get your samples, and did everyone come back in one piece? And the blues, who were the education and outreach people, only cared about how did everyone feel about it. And so there was no wonder that any time there were tensions in the organization, it was because people differed on what the value proposition was for a project. So it really helped me read different people in terms of what their values were, and helped me understand how to get people to work more successfully together. So I think it's the people skills, which I wished I had learned sooner, because that's what I spend most of my time doing, is getting people to work together.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. That's a wonderful way to look at it, and I think that's absolutely right, that we get self-sorted. So actually, Marcia, let me stay with you just for maybe one more question. There have been a couple of questions actually that have expressed concerns about salaries, and I guess people are wondering whether salaries outside of science are equivalent or lower or higher than salaries within science. So perhaps you could speak to that, since you've had a range of jobs through different areas.
Yes. Well, let me say first, I would say that salaries inside the federal government were the highest levels in the federal government are lower than the highest levels outside the federal government for academia. But I would say that they are, for a mid-career person, they're fairly competitive with a mid-career person outside the federal government. So I would say that in general, someone going through the career stages until you get to the very highest level in the federal government, it's pretty competitive. For people at a private institution like Embari, it's also fairly competitive with private institutions, and I would say Embari, in terms of just the fact that it's privately funded, has a number of advantages just in terms of the research environment. So that more than offsets any differences in salary level. For salaries in publishing, we try very hard here at Science Magazine to make our salaries for, say, our associate editors and senior editors comparable to what people would be earning with Ph.D.s on the outside. The only thing I'd say is that at the very upper level, they would not be competitive with, say, a very renowned full professor, because there just isn't quite as much room to grow unless you talk about my position, say, as editor-in-chief, in which case it is everywhere, every bit as competitive as the most renowned full professor.
Mm-hmm. Great. Laurie, so a couple of comments from you quickly.
Sure, about salary?
Yep.
I am adequately compensated for my job. So that's one thing you actually could ask when you're doing your informational interviews is, would a starting salary in this position be between X and Y? You can use Glassdoor.com in order to get some information about what starting salaries could possibly be. But in general, I find that these salaries are again, like Marcia said, very competitive. And to me, being happy in my job also is a huge part of my overall compensation package. And I love my job. And so that means a lot to me, even more than sometimes than finances.
Great. Yeah, good point. And I guess there's not the same working all hours of the day and night that you might get as a postdoc.
And interestingly, I work harder now than I ever did as a bench-based scientist. And I never understood when I was a bench scientist why my PI would get up at 4 a.m. to start doing work, because I was never as passionate about the research as she was. Now that I have the job that I do, I'm always thinking about it, and I fully get why she would get up at 4 a.m. That doesn't mean I get up at 4 a.m. But I work harder now, and I work smarter now, and I'm always thinking about it because I absolutely adore what I do. And so that's what I want for everybody on this webinar. I want you to find something that you like to do, that it's not a chore to think about it. And Sean, you and I have talked in the past that, yeah, we might go home at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, but that doesn't mean we may not still be thinking about our jobs and thinking about how to make sure that the best information, I'm doing the best job I can. But you work because you love it, less so because that's what is expected 70 hours a week.
Right. So we're actually just a little bit over time, but Anish, I'm just going to give you the last word to just briefly talk about salaries in your industry.
Yeah, happy to speak to that. Private sector salaries run the gamut depending on what you're doing. And so if you're thinking about switching to the private sector, you can certainly be compensated at the same level or more. What I did want to address real quick, though, is for entry-level people coming straight out of grad school or something of that nature, that is where you might find that non-research career salaries are a little bit less than going into a research career. Entry level in the U.S. government is maybe not as competitive, but again, it gets back to what Lori was saying. You make the switch because you love it and because that's what you want to do.
Fantastic. So I think we're going to have to end the webinar there. I'm going to put up on your slide viewer just some of the points that we discussed as well as some others that we didn't get to. And while I do that, I'm going to thank our wonderful panelists for being with us today, for the great discussion they provided. Dr. Marsha McNutt from Science, Dr. Laurie Conlon from NIH, and Dr. Anish Goyal from the Boeing Company. Thank you to all of our online viewers for the fantastic questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them, but I hope we answered most of them. This webinar will be archived for viewing again at membercentral.aaas.org/multimedia/webinar, and I'm going to put that up on your screen right now as well. And that just reminds me that the one website that Laurie mentioned is glassdoor.com, www.glassdoor.com to check on salaries. The AAAS will be launching a full series of career webinars beginning in May, and topics will include starting your first lab, giving high-level presentations, careers in industry, and getting published. So more details will be announced soon. So please keep a lookout for that and check back on membercentral.AAAS.org over the coming weeks. Again, thank you so much to our panel for their advice, and to everyone listening in, good luck out there. Goodbye.
Okay, thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, everyone.